Alright guys, it's time for a challenge. We covered quite a lot in the last lesson, and I want to be sure that before we move on, you're really understanding what's going on behind the scenes here. Because as lessons progress, things get more and more complex, and if you don't have a firm grasp of the concepts here, then it's going to get harder next time. So in this challenge, I've updated the app.jsx and I've renamed some of these things. For example, instead of the full name, this is now named contact and set contact. And the idea is that we want to be able to use these values that the user have typed into these three inputs and put them into the H1 as well as a new paragraph element. So your job is to make this code work, basically. And the final outcome should allow the user to type their first name, which shows it in here, their last name, which shows it in the H1, and also an email, which will show up in a paragraph just below the H1, like this. So use the React developer tools to peek at what the state is looking like as you're changing your code. And remember to apply the things that we've talked about in the previous lessons, including managing state with JavaScript objects, making use of the previous state when updating, working with forms in React, and handling events. But I think at this point, it's probably a good idea for me to leave you to just get on with it and see how you get on. Have a struggle with this, and then once you're done, come back and we'll walk through the solution together. All right, so we've got this constant called contact, and it's set to an object that has three properties. And we can update contact using set contact. So when do we want that to happen? Well, probably when each of these inputs gets changed. So instead of typing the same thing out 3 times, you can also just hold down the Option key and click to make your cursor work on multiple lines. And here I'm going to add the onChange attribute, and I'm going to set it to call a method called handleChange, which I'm going to define just right here. And I'm going to get past an event when each of those inputs change. And inside this function, I'm going to create a new destructured object, so with the curly braces. And the thing that I want to destructure is the event.target, because I know I've got event.target.name, .placeholder, .value, and I only want to get hold of the .name and .value properties from this event.target. So now that I've destructured this into 2 constants, I can now use it in my code and try to handle this change. The next step is somehow updating this contact object, but only updating the fields that have changed. Let's first call the method that updates the contact, which is setContact. And I know already that I'm going to need to get hold of the previous value of contact. So let's go ahead and create a new arrow function here and tap into the previous value or previous contact, whatever it is you decide to name it, inside this arrow function. And here you can log to see what the value of previous value is if you forget how it works. But essentially what we want to do is we want to check to see if the name of the input is equal to fname, so this first input here. Well, then we want to go ahead and return an object where we only change the fname. But else if the name that was actually passed over happens to be the L name, or if it happens to be the email, well, in these cases, we probably want to return a different object. So I'm going to again hold down Option and click on each of these 3 places. And I'm going to write my return statement so I return an object in each of these cases. And then I'm going to add the names and values of my properties. In this case, I'm actually returning the same thing in exactly 3 places, but now I get to update it. If the name of the input was fname, well then the new value is probably going to be this one. If the name was lname, then the new value is going to be this one. And if the name was email, then the new value is going to be this one. Now that I've got this very, very long set contact, I can go ahead and try out my app. So I'm going to open up my Chrome Developer Tools, take a look at my components, select my app, expand the state of my object. First name, when I start typing, you can see it goes in here. Last name, when I start typing, it only modifies the last name without affecting anything else. And finally, email also works the same way. By peeking at this object, if you do have any unexpected things happening on screen, then this can obviously help you out a lot. Did you manage to get the solution right? If not, be sure to head back to your code and try to make sure that it works using what you've learned in this video. And the idea is really to get comfortable with what's actually happening behind the scenes here, where we're checking for the name of the input that triggered the handle change, and then we're using the new value from that event to populate a different field depending on which one was changed. Now, the last thing to remember to do is to add the value attribute to each of the inputs and keep them tied to the state. So I'm going to type out the value attribute here. And then the first one is going to be contact.fname. The second is contact.lname. And the last one is contact.email. Now, this code is very, very long, and even though the idea here is to try to make sure that it really makes sense to you when you're learning these new concepts, there's much, much shorter ways of writing this. That is what we're going to tackle in the next lesson. I'm going to show you how we can reduce all of this down to just 2 or 3 lines by using something from ES6 called the spread operator. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.